Spectator sports, by focusing attention on the prowess of a few athletes, discourage people from believing in their own power to change the world. Howard Zinn.
Karl Marx was famous for saying that religion was opiate for the masses. But what if I told you that spectator sports were the opiate of the middle class? Welcome to Analyzing Finance with Nick. Today I'm going to be talking about spectator sports and the class relationship. In a previous video I did about class divide in sports, I discussed sports are played by different social classes, where working class sports tend to be those either lower costs or more risk to personal health, mainly combat sports, whereas the more elite sports tend to be ones with higher barriers to entry and are more expensive and not as monetizable. And spectator sports also have a class dichotomy, and it's that really is become the greatest distraction of the middle class. And really your ranking within the middle class can be visibly seen by your relationship to professional sports and spectator sports generally. First, let's start with who doesn't really participate or is not that interested in professional sports. And again, I'm saying this as not somebody who hates sports. I've been a sports fan various times in my life, but there is a noticeable pattern on the socio and cultural impacts of it, which I think are generally discounted by sports fans as a whole. When it comes to the very lowest classes, they usually do not have time to play sports or of interest to play sports. They either have mental health issues that are holding them back. They may have to work much longer hours at below subsistence wages, so they really don't have the luxury to watch games on TV or go to games. The financial restrictions, it's too expensive to pay for tickets to attend for games or have cable packages or streaming packages needed to watch the games. I mean, yes, you could fall on the internet for a very reasonable price, but it's the very bottom society just doesn't have as much of a luxury to be following sports. So it's more common among the working classes and the middle class who have just enough base level of income that they're going to get, they're able to get by, and they do have weekends or evenings to watch games, but they don't have so much wealth that they can pursue better things to do with their free time. Like sports and following sports is one of the most affordable forms of leisure, even if ticket prices are very expensive. And I'll get into ticket prices later in this conversation. Like watching sports on TV is, whether through cable or streaming, is very reasonably priced. You can get highlights oftentimes on YouTube or other free sources. And involving sports as a pastime, especially in a more secular society where religion is not as dominant. And it's a good escape from a lot of politics, which in America, politics has kind of become a sport, given the level of polarization and red team versus blue team dynamics that go on in modern American politics. And just the horse race nature of political media too has some component to this. But still, sports are a very affordable identity to take on. They are a hobby that doesn't require too much commitment in terms of skill or financial commitment. Like it doesn't take any sort of education or knowledge or life experience to be able to watch a sports game. And since people have probably played at a lot of these sports sometime in their youth, because generally working class sports are the ones that are the most popular in terms of spectator sports, people in the culture have a general idea how they work. And after watching a few games, they understand the rules pretty well. Like, I'm amazed actually how sophisticated a lot of the knowledge is of sports fans to sports and even the business side of it. And if they can apply it, other things in life, there's a lot of potential there to really advance. So that accessibility is a big driver. Why aren't the elites into sports? Like, it's basically an inverse U-shaped curve in terms of interest and money spent on sports. The lower class don't really care or spend on sports. The middle class and the upper middle class spend the most money, time, and attention on sports. And the upper class, the elites, don't pay attention to sports really as much either. Why? Because they can do a lot more interesting things with their time in real life. Like, have you ever gone traveling on vacation or pursued like a more adventurous hobby, and we're just busy with other more exciting things in your life, you notice those same times your interest in sports declined. Like I've noticed in my personal life, when I moved away from my home country to a place in a different time zone where I just couldn't physically follow sports anymore and have a reasonable sleep schedule, along with the fact that I just had many other things going on in this place that were just new adventures occupying my time, I lost my interest in sports to a certain degree. And that was kind of the beginning of the end in terms of my avid sports fandom. And I think there are plenty of other people who've had similar experiences. Like the elites are more likely to have lived overseas. They're more likely to travel extensively, and they're more likely to be able to do certain expensive hobbies and activities that others can't on their weekends and free time due to financial constraints. So you're out there experiencing life in a more real and direct way. The need to vicariously follow others' accomplishments through sports diminishes. Same for highly accomplished professionals. Like if you are like a top lawyer or a top businessman or a top professional in some industry and you're out there just actually doing things that make a real difference, or politicians too. Like the fact that you're doing stuff yourself makes you less interested in vicariously following the other people's trials and tribulations. This isn't always the case, but I think the mindset, which is why I think a lot of the elites just simply aren't into sports, because they have the luxury to be able to afford to do better things, quote unquote, with their time, whether playing those sports or pursuing other hobbies that might be more intrinsically interesting or fulfilling. Or people in the elites are new money who are very busy building their wealth and being out there in the arena, as Teddy Roosevelt used to say. So they simply just do not have the time. So that comes about watching sports on TV. And if you notice, like the commercials on TV, they mostly cater to precariat, working and middle class people, because those are the audiences. So then if the elites and the rich aren't really interested in sports, then why is sports so expensive? Why are sports teams so expensive to buy? Why does it cost so much to go to a sporting event? Well, it's supply and demand like anything else. There's only 30 to 32 teams in each of the major 4 professional sports leagues in America. Most of the top premier soccer leagues in Europe, there's about 20 teams each in each country. So, and they haven't really had much expansion since the late 90s, early 2000s. So the result is you just have more of the population and general population growth creating more for the same amount of sports supplied. That explains the increases in player contracts and ticket prices and the whole thing. And the other thing is, well, where do they have the money to buy this? Well, it's simply a priority thing. Like I used to think like, man, I could never afford to go to the NBA Finals or the Rose Bowl or the Olympics or the World Cup or whatever sporting event that I wanted to go to at the time. And then I looked at it and I'm like, what did I spend on international travel in that year? Like, let's just say, for example, tickets for the Olympics cost $2,000 to go to like one track and field day and one say it's swimming. Let's say it's $2,000. And let's say that's about the same price as a European vacation, or a very reasonably priced European vacation, because it's going to be about $600 to $1,200 to fly out there, and then hotels and food and all that kind of thing. And when it adds up, you're spending the same amount on that European vacation as you would on a sporting event. And for less expensive sporting events, it's the same as instead of canceling your weekend trip to Mexico or your weekend trip to Tahoe, if you live in California, or my more East Coast audience, like a weekend trip to the Hamptons or to Florida. Like if you do the math on the flights and the rental car and the hotel and all things you'd spend on a trip, it's probably similar to what a family would spend on a sporting event, or maybe a little bit more. And so it's a priority thing. Certain people prioritize travel. Other people prioritize going to the other sports team in person. And the traveling has become a middle-class activity. So I think it's an equivalent trade-off. Or same with other hobbies. Like say instead of buying a new set of golf clubs and your green fees you spend playing golf is $50 to $100 around, plus the $1,000 you spend on golf course. You could use that same money to buy season tickets for a baseball team, a Major League Baseball team, or go to a couple games of each of the sports you follow. So it's really, from that perspective, if you look at the trade-off versus pursuing another hobby or traveling, it's about the same amount of money that people would spend. It's just instead you're giving up your trip to Europe to go to the Final Four. And I've even considered this. Like, I'm probably going to consider giving up traveling in 2028 and instead use that money to buy tickets for the Olympics, because this will probably be the only time that the Olympics is within driving distance of where I live. And so I want to go the opportunity to see it, because I don't think the Olympics will be back in Los Angeles within my lifetime. And that is worth it more to me than an international vacation, which I could do in any year. And that's just one of many examples of that inherent trade-off that a lot of middle-class people do. And you can tell where somebody stands in the middle class then based on that is where they sit. The lower middle classes, if they're going to games, sit in the nosebleed seats. The middle class sit a little bit closer. The upper middle class sits in the lower bowl, and the professional classes will either sit in the lower bowl or get box seats. If the elites aren't really involved in sports, then who owns the sports teams? Well, the sports teams are mostly entirely owned by new money, whether they made their wealth through being an early owner of these sports teams close to the foundation of the league, or through being successful in the business world in some other way and using those gains to buy the sports team. And you can simply just look at the ownership of the major professional sports teams in North America. If you look at the major North American sports teams, there's only about 5 ownership groups that can really be considered from old money families. The first one, the most notable, would be the Hunt family, who owned the Kansas City Chiefs. The Hunts, when they acquired the Chiefs, were already a older money family in the Kansas City area, and they have since owned the team. Other ones that really kind of qualify for this would be the Mara family, who owned the New York Giants, and Woody Johnson, who is from the Johnson and Johnson fortune, who owns the New York Jets. The Bidwell family was Chicago old money, and they've owned the Arizona Cardinals really essentially since 1932. And then the Wirtz family with the Chicago Blackhawks also have owned the team since 1950, and they've had substantial wealth going generations before that. But really, outside of those teams, pretty much every professional sports team in North America is owned by new money. Even ones you think would be old money, like the Pittsburgh Steelers and the Rooneys. Like Art Rooney Sr. was self-made. He built a business on boxing promoting, racetracks, and sports betting. And he was an entrepreneur who used his gains to buy the Steelers. Same with George Steinbrenner. George Steinbrenner was second generation of a shipbuilding family, and his father started the shipbuilding company in the Midwest, and the son used the gains to buy the New York Yankees. They're not really old money at the time of acquiring the team, and they still arguably are not old money to this day. But same with the Buss family. Dr. Jerry Buss was an entrepreneur and a chemist before he acquired the Lakers and built a fortune in real estate. So these people are not old money elites. The old money elites either do not have the liquidity to acquire professional sports teams, or less simply and more likely just lack the interest to do so. And the reason why new money likes buying professional sports teams because they grew up in the middle class and thought, oh man, I would love to one day own one of these sports teams. It's always been a dream. And you over here, like when a middle class American, like if they make billions of dollars, one of the first things they think about is buying a professional sports team. Even I think about buying the Lakers or the Angels should the finances permit it. But again, though, I think the elites really just don't have the same sort of emotional attachment, even in their childhood, to these sporting teams, and therefore really never got involved in this business. I think that professional sports, given its relative affordability as a hobby, it's a good form of cheap entertainment and provides a source of meaning in an otherwise secular world, and as a distraction for an otherwise politically and economically chaotic world, has basically ironed its place in society. However, it's really become more the domain of the middle class, who have the time and the mental bandwidth to be able to absorb interest in sports, Whereas those on other social classes either cannot have the luxury of being able to do so or have better things to do and are busy in the arena versus watching men in the arena. Let me know if your thoughts. Do I come off as elitist and condescending when I view sports as the opiates of the middle class? Would you buy a sports team if you had billions of dollars? And if so, what sports team would you think is the best investment from an ROI perspective? And which one would you want for personal reasons? I might do a future video on that in terms of if you were to buy a sports team, what would be the best ROI? But that's probably going to be a long way from now. Thank you guys for watching.